Chapter 1. The Stone Sun. He built walls to protect humanity, and then watched them fall. In the cold halls of history, there are names that echo like thunder, and there are names that endure like stone. Rogal Dorn was the latter. He was the wall between mankind and the abyss, the stone son of the Emperor, the unyielding bulwark of the Imperium. When others sought glory and conquest, Dorn sought certainty, the assurance that humanity would endure. But endurance in this galaxy is its own kind of curse. You clicked this video because you saw that phrase, the Primarch who never forgave himself. And it's true, this is not a tale of victory, nor of betrayal, but of the quiet agony that comes when the strongest wall realizes it could not hold. By the end, you'll understand why Rogal Dorn's greatest fortress was not made of stone, but of guilt. They say that when the Emperor found Dorn, he was not on a world. He was above one, a drifting bastion fortress, orbiting the frozen planet of Inwit, a relic from the dark age of technology, carved from the bones of forgotten empires, and made his home. There, the boy Primarch had not only survived the long exile that scattered his brothers across the stars, he had built something magnificent, not out of faith, not out of love, but out of order. Even as a child, Dorn saw the universe for what it was, chaos given form. And in chaos, he saw only one duty, to resist it, to impose structure where none remained, to build walls against the endless dark. When the Emperor came, he found Dorn waiting, not in awe, but in recognition. It was said that Dorn kneeled once, only once in all his life. And in that single gesture, the Emperor gained his most loyal son. From that day forward, Rogal Dorn became not just a Primarch, but the foundation upon which the Imperium would rise. The Emperor's words were law, but Dorn made them reality. When the Great Crusade began, it was Dorn who fortified its fleets, designed its defenses, and calculated the unbreakable geometries of victory. Where others glored in destruction, Dorn built. When his brothers burned worlds to cleanse them, Dorn raised fortresses so those worlds could never fall again. He was not the shining warrior like Sanguinius, nor the philosopher like Gilliman. He was the builder, the shield, the one who stood when all else wavered. Yet even among his brothers, there was unease. They called him cold, unbending, humorless. But that was the price of discipline. Dorn did not feel victory. He measured it. He did not celebrate survival. He demanded it. His sons, the Imperial Fists, were reflections of that creed. Relentless, ascetic, incapable of surrender. To them, pain was not punishment. It was a tool. They were taught that perfection was not glory, but duty. They flayed their own flesh when they failed. They built walls with their blood, because Dorn had taught them that loyalty was the only virtue that mattered, and loyalty meant sacrifice. Yet even then, the cracks began to form. Rogal Dorn did not see himself as divine. He saw himself as a weapon, forged for purpose. But when purpose falters, a weapon begins to question its edge. There are whispers that even before the heresy, Dorn's eyes carried sorrow, a quiet understanding that his purpose was too fragile, too human, to last. For every wall he built, the galaxy tore down 10 more. Every defense he perfected, chaos found a way to corrupt. He watched his brothers spiral, some into madness, others into pride, others into rebellion. And though he stood steadfast, he began to wonder if loyalty itself was a flaw. If by building walls, he was only delaying the inevitable fall. And still, he built. He built the defenses of countless worlds. He carved bastions into the bones of dead moons. He laid the first stones of the Imperial Palace itself, a fortress meant to withstand not armies, but ages. The Emperor trusted him above all others. For when the final war came, it would not be the sons who burned brightest who mattered. It would be the one who endured longest. And Dorn, he endured everything but peace. He was not a father to his sons. He was a warden. To serve him was to suffer, and they did so willingly. For to fail Rogal Dorn was to fail the Emperor, and there was no greater sin. Some called him heartless. They were wrong. Dorn had a heart. He simply refused to let it guide him, because in his mind, emotion was weakness, and weakness was treason. But beneath the stoic facade, something lingered, a fear, deep and unspoken. Not of death, not even a failure, but of forgiveness. Because if Dorn ever forgave himself for his flaws, for his doubts, he feared he would become like the brothers he despised. And so, he never did. He built walls against everything, against chaos, against betrayal, against love, until all that remained within him was stone. And yet, in the quiet corners of his fortress, the cracks deepened. The Emperor was a god of vision, but not of comfort. Dorn's life was one long act of devotion to a father who never returned affection. He built the walls of the palace not for glory, but to protect a dream that was never his own. A dream he would one day die defending and still believe he had failed. The tragedy of Rogal Dorn does not begin with his fall. It begins with his faith, not in gods, but in duty. A faith so absolute that when it finally shattered, it took his soul with it. Because what happens when the wall itself begins to break? The Stone Sun was about to find out. For soon, the galaxy would burn, and every wall he had built, every principle, every bastion, every unbreakable oath would be tested. And even Rogal Dorn could not save everything. Chapter 2. The Architect of War. They called him a builder. They were wrong. He was a weapon that built. Rogal Dorn did not create for beauty. He created for survival. Every line, every bastion, every rampart was a prayer written in stone, not to the Emperor's divinity, but to his intent. To Dorn, building was not craft. It was warfare in slow motion. Every wall was a soldier. Every fortress, a sermon against entropy. And in that cold geometry of survival, Dorn found something resembling peace. When the Great Crusade reached its zenith, the Emperor gave him a task that would define eternity: fortify Terra, make the cradle of mankind unbreakable, protect it not from armies, but from the future itself. It was then that Dorn truly became the architect of war. While his brothers sought glory and flame and conquest, Dorn turned inward, into the mathematics of war. Where others wrote strategies, Dorn constructed them. His mind saw weakness the way others saw color. He walked battlefields and saw not corpses but patterns. Every breach, every ruin, every crater whispered its lesson. And he learned. The Imperial Palace began as a sprawl of ancient ruins and half-forgotten vaults from the age of strife. Dorn tore them down, rebuilt them, and in doing so, remade humanity's last hope into something divine. He turned Terra into a cathedral of defense, a planet encased in sanctified iron. Tens of thousands of bastions interlocked across its surface, each designed to delay death by another heartbeat. Every wall an oath, every corridor a promise, every gun battery a confession of fear. And the Emperor, inscrutable, untouchable, watched his stone sun with the rarest of gestures, approval. But approval was not warmth. When other Primarchs were praised for victories, the Emperor merely nodded to Dorn and said, "Continue." And Dorn did, because duty, for him, was oxygen. Without it, he would suffocate. He brought with him the sons of Inwit, his Imperial Fists, artisans of flesh and fury. Under his command, they became legends of endurance. Their discipline was absolute. They learned to build faster than others could destroy, to fight within structures they erected in the midst of bombardment. They were the Emperor's masons of war, the ones who carved permanence into a galaxy of decay. But perfection, once tasted, becomes addiction. And Dorn could not stop. He began to see flaws everywhere. In the fortresses of his brothers, in their strategies, even in the Emperor's grand plan. He never said it aloud, but the thought burned within him. If they built like I build, they would never fall. This pride was not loud. It was quiet, cold, righteous, and in the silence of Terra's deep vaults, it grew. To understand Dorn is to understand control. Every stone he laid was an act of defiance against the chaos he saw in others. Fulgrim's vanity, Angren's rage, Russ's savagery. He was the counterpoint to their madness. But the tighter he gripped the order of his world, the more it began to suffocate him. He did not laugh. He did not rest. He slept standing, armored, his mind always building. His sons began to mirror him, pale, gaunt, hollow-eyed from sleepless vigilance. They did not question it. To be like Dorn was to be worthy of life. When Horus fell to darkness, when whispers of rebellion spread through the void, Dorn was the one who refused disbelief. While Guilliman sought proof and Russ sought vengeance, Dorn prepared for the inevitable. He fortified the soul system, doubling every wall, tripling every defense, until Terra became less a world and more a scar across the stars. Some called it paranoia. Dorn called it realism, for he knew what his brothers would not admit. The Imperium was built too fast, too far. It was an empire of bone and light spread over a pit of madness. The moment one sun fell, the rest would follow, unless someone stood ready to hold the line. He would be that line. And when the Emperor left Terra to confront Horus, he placed his throne's protection in Dorn's hands. "You are my Praetorian," he said. "You are my wall." Dorn bowed, not out of pride, but because the words condemned him. The Emperor had not said, "You are my son." He had said, "You are my wall." From that moment, Rogal Dorn ceased to be a man. He became a function. He did not mourn. He did not question. He built. He fortified Luna, Mars, the orbital defense networks, layer upon layer of kill zones, automated batteries, void shields, and subterranean redoubts that reached miles into the crust. When Mechanicum adepts balked at his demands, he broke them with logic and purpose. "We build to preserve the Emperor's will," he told them. "Your machines exist for that, or they exist for nothing." And they obeyed. Yet, as the heresy spread, cracks formed not in stone, but in faith. Sanguinius, noble and radiant, warned Dorn that walls could not hold forever, that sometimes faith required flight, not fortification. Perturabo mocked him openly, calling him a coward who hid behind mortar and mathematics. And Dorn's reply, cold and cutting, would haunt them both forever. "I build because I can. You destroy because you must." But even that rivalry, that twin mirror of builder and breaker, carried something deeper. A recognition. Perturabo saw in Dorn the same hunger for perfection, the same rage at the universe's flaws. They were two sides of one tragic design, one building to preserve order, the other breaking to expose its futility. And both, in their own ways, were right. As word of Horus's rebellion reached Terra, Dorn was ready. The fleets were armed, the palace sealed, the walls prepared. But even then, in the quiet before the storm, he could not sleep, because deep down, he knew, no wall can protect the soul for what's coming. For the enemy was not only his brother. It was the failure of everything he'd built, the test he had feared his entire life. And when the storm came, when the skies of Terra burned, and the palace trembled beneath the fury of gods, Rogal Dorn would finally face the truth he had built his life to avoid. That sometimes the wall does not hold, and sometimes that is the only way the truth gets in. Chapter 3. The Unbreakable Line. They called him unyielding. They mistook endurance for peace. Rogal Dorn believed loyalty was not love. It was labor. It was pain. It was the act of standing when every instinct screamed to fall. To Dorn, loyalty was not the warmth between brothers. It was the cold acceptance that your life was a tool, and your death, a duty. When Horus's betrayal shattered the stars, the galaxy learned what that kind of loyalty truly meant. The Emperor had gone to confront his wayward son. The throne room on Terra was not yet the sacred relic it would become. It was still a construction site of war. And in the hollow echo of that place, Rogal Dorn watched the door close behind the Emperor for the last time. He did not say goodbye. He did not ask for blessings. He only whispered, "I will hold the line." And then he did. For 7 years of terror and betrayal, Dorn became the soul of the Imperium's last defense. His fleet fought not for conquest, but for containment, retreating from ruined worlds, consolidating forces, buying every second of time humanity could still afford. The Imperial Palace had not been completed when the heresy reached Seoul. The walls were still bleeding mortar and sweat. Thousands of servitors lay dead beneath unfinished gun decks. And yet, when the traitor legions came, Dorn's fortress, that labyrinth of iron and sanctified ruin, became the beating heart of resistance itself. He positioned every gun, calculated every impact point, coordinated every loyal legion's defense. Even Gilliman, far away, would later write, "Dorn fought not with fury, but with mathematics." He made faith out of geometry. To his sons, the Imperial Fists, he became more than father. He was law. They did not fight for victory. They fought for endurance. When the Iron Warriors came, Perturabo's legions of siege masters, the air itself screamed with irony. Brother against brother, builder against breaker. The walls that Dorn had raised would be tested by the only man who could truly understand them. And still, Dorn did not waver. He took no rest. He ordered his men to die by numbers. When entire battalions of fists were obliterated, he did not mourn. He recalculated. To him, grief was an inefficiency. Each life lost became another lesson in defense. Each death, a brick in the wall of survival. The custodians fought beside them, golden and silent, and even they came to respect the mortal brutality of Dorn's logic. One of them, known only as Valerian, later said, "The Praetorian's heart was iron. When ours broke, his did not. But our hearts still corrode." The Siege of Terra was not only a war of shells and swords. It was a war of endurance, of faith, of identity. Dorn's brothers were dead, dying, or damned. Fulgrim's laughter echoed in the warp. Angren's rage cracked the heavens. Mortarian's plagues swept across the stars. And through it all, Dorn stood, the last brother who still believed the Emperor's dream could be saved. His belief became a curse. When Sanguinius descended to Terra, wounded and radiant, Dorn welcomed him not as a friend, but as another weapon for the wall. The angel, graceful and bright, saw in Dorn a man already half a tomb. He tried to speak to him, to tell him that walls cannot save souls, that sometimes the only defense is faith. Dorn only replied, "Faith cannot stop artillery." The angel smiled sadly, "But can stop despair." For a heartbeat, something in Dorn cracked. Then he turned away. He did not understand faith. He understood sacrifice. He believed that to be loyal was to die correctly, to die usefully. So he built his defense not to survive, but to make the galaxy understand what loyalty costs. Every corridor of the Imperial Palace became a graveyard. Every bastion, a shrine to the fallen. The Imperial Fists did not fight for vengeance. They fought for proof. Proof that their devotion meant something. And still, Dorn would not rest. His armor was etched with cracks. His face grew hollow beneath its helm. He ate nothing but duty, drank nothing but fear. There were nights when even his sons dared not approach him. They heard him muttering to himself in the dark halls, speaking to the Emperor, to the walls, to no one. "I will hold. I will hold. I will hold." Some began to whisper that the Praetorian of Terra was breaking, that his mind was fracturing under the weight of impossible duty. But if it was madness, it was the kind of madness that built empires. When a captain once asked him if they could retreat from a collapsing defense line, Dorn struck him to the ground and said, "There is no retreat. There is only the wall." Because in Dorn's heart, the wall had ceased to be stone. It was him, his flesh, his mind, his identity. If Terra fell, he would fall. And if he fell, humanity itself would die. He carried that burden willingly, but he was alone in it. Even among his brothers, Dorn was the one who did not break, but did not bend either. That was his strength and his damnation, because walls that do not bend must eventually crack. And beneath the burning skies of Terra, as the black ships of Horus blotted out the sun, Rogal Dorn's wall would finally be tested. Not by siege, not by logic, but by grief. He had sworn to protect the Emperor. He had sworn to protect his dream. But in the end, all walls crumble. And when that moment came, when the angel fell and the Emperor was broken, Rogal Dorn would learn the one truth he could never build against. You cannot fortify the soul. Chapter 4. The Fall of Terra. They say the walls of the Imperial Palace could never fall. They were wrong. They didn't fall to bombardment. They fell to grief. The Siege of Terra began not with the sound of artillery, but with the sound of prayer. A billion voices crying out into the ash-filled sky, begging for deliverance. And in the hollow silence that followed, only one voice answered. Rogal Dorn. He stood atop the highest bastion of the palace, the wind howling across the parapets, his armor dusted in ash and blood. Below him stretched a planet at war, a sea of fire, broken spires, and endless legions of the damned. The sky was red with the light of dying ships. And still, he stood. He had prepared for every possibility, every contingency. Every line of defense had been calculated, every kill zone preordained. He had fortified Terra as though the gods themselves might come for it. And they did. Horus's forces fell upon the palace like a nightmare given flesh. The traitor legions crashed against the walls in waves. Iron warriors drilling through Pharaohcrete, world eaters tearing through bastions with their bare hands, Death Guard filling the air with rot and despair. The sky burned with demon fire, and the ground melted beneath their fury. And still, Dorn refused to break. He commanded the defense with the precision of a machine. Every order delivered like a blade, every death accounted for, every retreat calculated to the second. To his sons, he seemed unstoppable, an immortal engine of will. But within, he was burning. Each report cut him like glass. Entire battalions gone. Titans silenced. The outer walls breached. The palace was a living corpse, its arteries collapsing, its bones shattering beneath the storm. And above it all, the sound, that endless, merciless bombardment, the rhythm of apocalypse. For days, Dorn did not sleep. He paced the command spire, eyes bloodshot, voice ragged. Even his armor had begun to decay beneath the constant strain. The sigils of loyalty carved into his pauldrons were blackened by soot. The light of the palace flickered in his gaze. Sanguinius, the angel, stood beside him in those final nights. And though the two brothers had always been opposites, faith and reason, mercy and order, in that crucible, they became equals. Sanguinius fought to protect the soul of mankind. Dorn fought to preserve its body. Together, they were the Emperor's last heartbeat. There are stories of those moments, whispered through the ages like fragments of a prayer, of how the angel tried to teach the stone son how to hope, how he told him that faith was not weakness, but defiance, that to believe in something greater, even when all reason said it was lost, was the truest kind of strength. Dorn said nothing, but his silence was not dismissal. It was fear, because faith requires surrender, and Rogal Dorn had never surrendered to anything, not even himself. When the Eternity Gate fell under siege, Dorn was there, sword in hand, his armor fractured, his voice roaring above the gunfire. He fought not as a Primarch, but as a wall of flesh and fury. Every blow he struck was an act of penance. Every life he saved, a fraction of redemption he didn't believe he deserved. He watched the custodians fall around him, golden gods torn apart by demons. He watched his sons die by the thousands, their blood turning the marble red. And still, he did not yield. He stood beside Sanguinius at the last bastion of the Imperial Palace, two demigods against an unending tide of horror. The sky above them split open, reality screaming as the vengeful spirit descended, Horus's flagship blotting out the stars. That was the moment Dorn realized the truth he had spent a lifetime denying. No wall could hold back gods. Not his, not the Emperor's, not even the ones carved from faith. He looked to Sanguinius, radiant even in ruin, and for the first time, Dorn saw what strength looked like when it broke. Sanguinius smiled through the blood on his lips and said, "Brother, hold the line. I will see the end." And Dorn, with every fiber of his being, wanted to stop him, to drag him back, to fight together one last time. But duty was cruel, and loyalty demanded sacrifice. So he let the angel go. He watched him fly toward the vengeful spirit, toward the heart of madness, toward death. And in that moment, Rogal Dorn's heart began to fracture. Hours passed. The walls burned. The defenders screamed. And then, silence. A psychic scream tore through reality itself. The angel had fallen, and the Emperor was gone. Dorn felt it before he saw it. A void in his mind, a light snuffed out. He staggered, knees buckling, the weight of that absence crushing him more completely than any bombardment ever could. He felt his soul collapse beneath the realization that his father, his God, his reason, had been broken. When the order came to withdraw to the throne room, Dorn went alone. The palace was a grave. The walls he had built stood black and smoking, their purpose fulfilled, their builder undone. He walked through corridors of ash and ruin until he reached the golden throne. And there, amid the silence of eternity, he found what was left of the dream he had sworn to protect. The Emperor's body, ruined, lifeless, enthroned in death. Sanguinius, fallen at his feet, his wings broken, his eyes closed in peace. And Rogal Dorn, the unbreakable, fell to his knees. For the first time, the wall cracked. The stone sun wept. No words, no sound, only the silence of everything he had ever loved reduced to dust. He had done everything right. Every wall built, every defense held, every sacrifice made. And still it wasn't enough. For the first time in his life, Rogal Dorn realized that loyalty could not save gods, that duty could not protect dreams, and that sometimes the walls we build are the cages we die inside. He rose from his knees, not as the Praetorian of Terra, but as something else entirely, a ghost of purpose wrapped in flesh. The war was over. The Emperor was dead, and the man who had built eternity stood amidst its ashes, whispering a single phrase, over and over, to no one. I failed him, and in that whisper, the unbreakable line was finally broken. Chapter 6. The Burden of Survival. They say heroes die in glory. Rogal Dorn lived, and that was his punishment. After the Siege of Terra, silence became a weapon sharper than any blade. The guns went quiet. The skies cleared. But to Rogal Dorn, the world was not saved. It was simply empty. The Emperor was gone, his body interred on the golden throne, his will transmuted into a burning, endless silence. Sanguinius was dead. Half the galaxy lay in ruin. And of all the Emperor's sons who had survived, none bore the weight of that survival like Dorn. He did not weep again. He did not scream, or curse, or rage. He rebuilt, because that was all he knew how to do. The palace became his prison. Its blackened stones and broken halls echoed with memories of the dead, of brothers he could not save, of walls that had not held, of faith that had cracked like mortar. He walked those ruins like a ghost, overseeing the reconstruction with a precision bordering on madness. Servitors would find him wandering the lower vaults, tracing cracks in the walls with blood-stained fingers, whispering to himself, "This should have held. This should have held." He ordered the palace rebuilt stronger than before, layer upon layer. until even the light struggled to pass through. When questioned why, he answered, "Because I will not fail him twice." But the truth was crueler. He was not rebuilding for protection. He was rebuilding to bury his guilt. The Imperium mourned, but Dorn did not allow himself the luxury. The galaxy demanded reconstruction. Armies reorganized, fortresses razed, traitors hunted. While Guilliman crafted the Codex Astartes to save the Imperium structure, Dorn wielded it like a knife against his own heart. When the decree came, to break the legions into smaller chapters, Dorn's fury finally broke the silence. He saw it as an act of cowardice. "We bled for unity," he thundered. "Now you would divide us for fear of our own strength." For a time, it seemed the Imperial Fists would refuse. The wound between him and Guilliman widened, threatening to fracture the Imperium once more. But beneath his rage, Dorn knew the truth. He was angry not at Guilliman, but at himself, for failing the one unity that had mattered most. He had been the wall, the protector, the unbreakable son, and still, the Emperor had fallen. To obey the Codex was to admit that his father's dream had died, but to disobey was to betray what remained of it. So Dorn did what he always did. He obeyed. With shaking hands, he took the blade and divided his legion. The Imperial Fists would remain on Terra. The Crimson Fists and the Black Templars would be born from their blood. When the ceremony was complete, Dorn turned away and said quietly, "The walls are thinner now." He withdrew from politics, from the councils of Terra, from his brothers. He could no longer look at them without seeing ghosts. Guilliman's endless optimism, Vulcan's faith, the twin flames of love and pride that had burned in the Emperor's gaze. All gone. In their place, he built. He rebuilt the palace. He reforged his fleet. He rebuilt himself. Not as man, not as father, not even as Primarch, but as a function. Sleep became rare, food meaningless. He would spend days sealed within the phalanx, his great void fortress, wandering its endless decks, hands brushing the walls as though feeling for a pulse that wasn't there. To his sons, he remained a figure of awe, but those who served closest saw the truth. Their father was fading, not dying, eroding, piece by piece, guilt by guilt. Some nights, he would summon his captains and ask them questions that chilled their souls. If the wall holds, but everything behind it dies, is that victory? If the Emperor had lived, would he still have loved us? If I fall, will anyone remember that I tried? No one answered, because there was no answer. Dorn's hands, once steady enough to carve the foundations of the palace itself, began to tremble. He hid under armor, under discipline, under duty, but the cracks deepened. His sons began to take on his guilt as their own. The Imperial Fists turned penance into art. They built fortresses across the stars, monuments of stone and self-loathing, each one a confession carved into bedrock. They fought not to win, but to endure. Pain became their prayer, and Dorn did not stop them, because in their suffering, he saw reflection. They called the pain glove, a device of agony, electrical needles piercing flesh, feeding pain directly into the nervous system. To others, it was madness. To Dorn's sons, it was absolution. And though he never admitted it, some whispered that Dorn himself used it, that in the silence of the phalanx, he would stand within that field of agony until his body could no longer move. Not as punishment, as remembrance. But guilt is not infinite. It consumes until there is nothing left. So when word came that Perturabo, the brother who had mirrored him in hatred, still lived, something inside Dorn shifted. Here, at last, was purpose. Here, at last, was a chance to make meaning of the failure. The Iron Cage, they would call it. A fortress built by Perturabo as both trap and challenge. A labyrinth of death designed to humiliate the sons of Dorn. And Dorn accepted the invitation. His captains begged him to reconsider. His brothers warned him that it was suicide. But Dorn only smiled, a thin, hollow thing, and said, "If I die there, then perhaps I will finally have built something that holds." Because for Rogal Dorn, survival was no longer a duty. It was a burden, and the only way to lift it was to die for the dream he had already lost. He would not seek redemption. He would earn it, one drop of blood at a time. And so the Praetorian of Terra prepared for his final crusade. The wall was going to war. Chapter 7. The Last Crusade. They say Rogal Dorn went to war one last time. Not to win, but to bleed. The Iron Cage was not a battlefield. It was a confession, carved in steel, soaked in vengeance, built by a monster who knew exactly how to make his brother suffer. Perturabo, the architect of destruction, the mirror Dorn could never break. After the heresy, the traitor had fled into the Eye of Terror, his soul twisted and reshaped by the gods he once mocked. Yet even in damnation, Perturabo remembered Dorn, the golden son of geometry, the one who had called him destroyer while pretending to be pure. So he built his answer, a fortress, a trap, an iron labyrinth designed not to test defenses, but to mock them, the Iron Cage. And when its location reached Terra, Dorn did not hesitate. No counsel, no debate, no strategy, only purpose, only guilt. To his sons, he said, "We go to reclaim what is ours. We go to prove the wall still stands." But they saw it in his eyes. This was not duty. It was suicide dressed as devotion. The Imperial Fists gathered their fleets. From Phalanx, their great void fortress, they descended upon the Iron Warrior's bastion like a storm of vengeance. Yellow and black, the colors of endurance, against the rusted iron of hatred. The stars themselves seemed to recoil, for what followed was not war. It was the slow murder of loyalty. The Iron Cage was endless. Miles of trenches, bunkers, kill zones, towers riddled with false passages and traps. Dorn, master of fortifications, recognized its genius immediately. Every angle, every layer, every dead end whispered Perturabo's voice. It was a structure designed by someone who knew how Dorn thought, because they had once shared the same mind. And Dorn smiled, a grim, terrible smile, because for the first time since Terra, he felt something real. Pain. He ordered the assault. The Imperial Fists advanced, not cautiously, not strategically, but with the reckless precision of zealots. Wave after wave, line after line, each one swallowed by the cage. Their bolters thundered, their blades sang, their blood painted the walls. Every corridor was a tomb, every tower a grave. Perturabo watched from his command spire, not with joy, but with satisfaction. He had built this place not to win, but to teach, to show Dorn that all walls fall, and all builders are fools. The two sons of the Emperor were no longer fighting for victory. They were fighting for ideology. One to prove that structure could survive chaos. The other to prove that it never could. And slowly, inexorably, the Iron Cage began to consume them. For days, perhaps weeks, Dorn's forces fought inside that metal labyrinth. Food ran out. Ammunition dwindled. Box lines broke. But the Fists did not retreat. Because Rogal Dorn did not retreat. He led from the front, blood-slick armor cracked and scorched, his voice echoing through the labyrinth like a mantra. Endure. Advance. Endure. When captains begged him to withdraw, he struck them down himself. To leave was to admit weakness. To survive was to betray the fallen. He had built walls his whole life to protect mankind. And now, in this iron tomb, he was the wall. Every step forward was an act of self-destruction. The Iron Warriors unleashed everything. Demon engines, virus bombs, gravitational traps that crushed flesh into pulp. And still Dorn's sons came. Each one a prayer made of fury. Each one a reflection of their father's torment. They say Perturabo laughed when he realized Dorn would not stop, because in that madness he saw himself. Two architects, one bound by guilt, the other by pride, finally seeing their designs collapse into the same ruin. By the seventh day, the fists were broken, tens of thousands dead, entire companies erased, their Primarch wounded, delirious, yet still fighting. He carved his way through the heart of the fortress, roaring his brother's name. Perturabo, come face me. And Perturabo did. In the center of the labyrinth, surrounded by his dead and dying sons, Rogal Dorn met the brother he had hated and pitted in equal measure. Neither spoke of the Emperor, neither spoke of the heresy. They simply looked at each other, two reflections, both built from the same flaw. Perturabo sneered. Still building your walls, brother? Still pretending stone can stop the truth? Dorn's reply was a whisper. Stone does not hold forever, but it holds long enough. Then they fought. It was not a duel. It was an exorcism. Steel against steel, logic against rage, guilt against hatred. They were not men, but ideologies made flesh. The ground cracked beneath their blows. The air screamed with the echo of their fury. No one knows how long it lasted. Hours. Days. When it was over, Dorn was broken. His armor shattered. His sons dying around him. And Perturabo, victorious, but hollow, turned away. He did not kill Dorn. He wanted him to live. To remember. To know that even walls can bleed. And so he left him there, amidst the ruins, amidst the bodies of the faithful. Because some victories are crueler than death. When the Ultramarines arrived to rescue what remained, they found Rogal Dorn half dead, clutching the body of a fallen captain. His voice was a rasp of blood and dust. We held the line, he whispered. We held. The iron cage was a slaughter, a massacre, a tragedy so vast it almost eclipsed the heresy itself. But in its aftermath, something shifted in Dorn's sons. They no longer fought to prove their father right. They fought to prove that his suffering had meaning. For Rogal Dorn, there was no peace. The iron cage had taken everything from him. His pride, his purpose, his belief in redemption. He returned to Terra not as a hero, but as a ruin that could still stand. He refused honors. He refused praise. He rebuilt the walls. Again, because it was all he knew. And in the back of his mind, one thought haunted him like a wound that would never heal. If I had died there, maybe he would have forgiven me. The Emperor was silent. The angel was gone, and the builders still lived, trapped in the one fortress he could never escape. Himself. Chapter 8. The Hand That Remained. They say they found only his hand, but even that was still clenched into a fist. There are deaths that end lives, and deaths that end legacies. Rogal Dorn's was neither. It was an unfinished sentence, carved into eternity. After the iron cage, the stone son of the Emperor was no longer whole. His body healed, but his purpose did not. His eyes, once cold and calculating, had gone hollow, as if the soul behind them had receded somewhere unreachable. He rarely spoke. When he did, his words came slow, heavy, like stones dropped into a bottomless well. His sons gathered around him. The Crimson Fists, the Black Templars, the Imperial Fists, each seeking direction, but Dorn had none left to give. He looked at them and saw ghosts. He looked at the walls he rebuilt and saw tombs. Yet duty does not rest, even for the damned. When word came of a chaos incursion in the Phalanx's patrol routes, a fleet of traitor warships, remnants of the Iron Warriors, drifting through the void like carrion, Dorn answered. He could have sent others. He could have commanded from safety. But Rogal Dorn was not made to sit on thrones. He went himself. To his sons, he said little. Only this: I have failed once. I will not fail again. Those words, simple and hollow, became prophecy. The Phalanx, fortress of light, bastion of the Imperial Fists, a weapon that could hold back suns, descended into the dark. Its decks groaned like the heartbeat of a god preparing to die. When the traitor fleet appeared, it was not an army. It was a wound in reality, the ghosts of Perturabo's sons, come to finish the last war. They were led by demon engines that bore the sigils of the Iron Cage, mockeries of geometry that made the warp bleed. The Phalanx struck first. Macro cannons screamed. Lance batteries tore through void shields. For a time, it seemed victory might be theirs. But then, the boarding alarms. The traitors came not to destroy the fortress, but to claim it. Iron warriors, or what remained of them, breached the outer decks, their armor etched with runes of mockery and hate. And Dorn was there to meet them. He led the counterattack personally, moving through fire and void like a storm given flesh. The years fell away. He was once again the Praetorian of Terra, the unbreakable line. Bolter shells tore through his armor. His blood froze in the void. His voice roared over the Vox, commanding, calculating, building even as he killed. Every corridor became a wall. Every choke point, a fortress. For 3 days, the battle raged. No retreat, no surrender, no mercy. Rogal Dorn fought like a man who had already accepted his death, not seeking victory, but meaning. His last confirmed transmission came from the Phalanx's lower decks, where the fighting had grown so fierce that even the machine spirits screamed in pain. He said only, "I will hold," and then silence. When his sons finally secured the fortress, there was nothing left of him. No body, no voice, only fragments of armor and the blood of a Primarch, dark and crystalline in the vacuum. And one hand. It was found in the remains of a shattered airlock, still gripping the hilt of a chain word. Its ceramite fingers fused together in death. Even separated from the body, the hand was locked in the shape of defiance, a clenched fist. They brought it back to Terra, sealed it within the eternal fortress beneath the Imperial Palace, and built around it a shrine of gold and stone. It rests there still, a relic, a reminder. Some say he died that day, slain by demon and iron, his body lost to the warp. Others say he was not killed, but taken, that the Phalanx's machine spirit, loyal beyond reason, swallowed him into its data core, preserving him as a digital ghost, forever commanding its defenses. And there are whispers darker still that Dorn did not die at all, that he walked into the void willingly, leaving his hand behind as proof, a symbol that he had built his final wall between himself and humanity. His sons believe otherwise. To them, he lives, not in flesh, but in purpose. Every fortress they raise bears his geometry. Every defense line follows his doctrine. Every battle fought in the Emperor's name is a continuation of the same vow. I will hold. The Black Templars, his most zealous heirs, took his silence as scripture. They do not wait for his return. They crusade to honor the wound he left, a wound shaped like loyalty. And yet, in the quiet of the Phalanx's deepest vaults, where the machine's spirits hum like distant prayers, some claim they hear footsteps. Heavy, measured, the sound of armor moving through corridors that no man has walked in 10,000 years. They say the fortress still obeys him, that when battle comes, its guns shift fractionally before the command is given, as though some unseen hand guides them. Perhaps it is myth, perhaps it is faith, or perhaps the stone sun built one last fortress, not of rock or steel, but of memory. Because in a galaxy of decay and madness, there is still one truth that endures. Walls fall, empires die, even gods turn to dust, but Rogal Dorn still holds. Even in death, or whatever became of him, the wall remains. The Emperor's most loyal son, the one who never forgave himself, the builder who could not rest, even after the galaxy buried him. And in that eternal silence between stars, the Imperium's last whisper carries his creed still. We are the wall, and we do not break. Chapter 9. The Eternal Watch. He was not the son who betrayed, nor the one who fell. He was the one who stayed, and broke under the weight of loyalty. 10,000 years have passed. 10,000 years of ash and silence. And still, in the echoing dark between stars, the name Rogal Dorn endures, not as a man, not as a myth, but as a law. He is gone, yes, but he is not absent. For in every fortress that still stands against the void, in every bastion that holds when the light dies, his hand, that severed, sacred hand, clenches the galaxy together by sheer will. The Imperium has forgotten the faces of many of its heroes, but not him, never him, because Rogal Dorn did not build to be remembered. He built so others could forget, so that mankind could sleep behind walls it would never thank him for. That was his curse and his greatness. In the golden age of the Emperor, Dorn's walls were meant to defend mankind's ascension. Now, in this age of rot and relapse, they defend only its survival. But still they hold, because Dorn built them not for victory, but for endurance. And endurance, true endurance, does not end. The Imperial Palace remains his masterpiece, a mountain of stone and faith piled upon itself for 10,000 years, rebuilt, repaired, reinforced, each new layer honoring his ghost. Servitors maintain the walls he once laid by hand. Tech priests whisper binary prayers to their machine spirits, words written in the language he devised. And somewhere deep within the inner vaults, beneath the crushing weight of time, the hand of Dorn remains, encased in stasis light, fingers curled into a fist that is never opened. The priests say it hums when the enemy draws near, that faint vibrations ripple through the marble, a resonance like the heartbeat of the wall itself. Superstition, perhaps, but in a galaxy of madness, superstition is often just another word for memory. For the sons of Dorn, there is no peace. The Crimson Fists, guardians of honor. The Black Templars, zealots of eternal crusade. The Imperial Fists, keepers of the walls of Terra. Each carries a fragment of their father's guilt, a shard of his perfection, a whisper of his pain. The Crimson Fists, their fortress shattered by the fury of the Xenos, still fight from ruins, proving that broken walls can still kill. The Black Templars, who know no rest, scour the stars in endless pilgrimage, searching, perhaps, for the father who never returned. And the Imperial Fists, stationed upon the phalanx, stand watch over Terra still, their creed carved in golden blood. Pain is our faith, endurance our prayer, duty our God. They do not worship Rogal Dorn. They embody him. They suffer because he could not stop suffering. They endure because he could not allow himself peace. They build because he could never stop building. And through them, he still speaks, not in words, but in purpose. Each fortress they raise is an echo of his will. Each sacrifice a repetition of his vow. Each death in silence a reminder that the wall does not choose who it saves. It simply stands until it can stand no more. To understand Rogal Dorn is to understand tragedy itself. He was loyalty incarnate, and loyalty, in this universe, is a blade that cuts only one way. He did not betray. He did not fall. He did not yield. And yet, he suffered more than those who did, because he carried the weight of every wall that ever fell, every brother that ever died, every son that ever looked to him for hope, and saw only duty staring back. He never forgave Horus. He never forgave the Emperor. But most of all, he never forgave himself for surviving, for failing, for enduring when gods could not. That is the paradox of Rogal Dorn. He built eternity, but could not live in it. He saved mankind, but could not save himself. He held the line, and in holding it, became trapped within it forever. And so, the wall remains, not the stone of Terra, not the adamantium of phalanx, but the unseen wall that stands between mankind and oblivion. A wall built from a single man's will to endure when hope was gone. Every time a guardsman stands his post against the dark, every time an Astartes refuses retreat, every time the Imperium refuses to die, Rogal Dorn is there. Not as a ghost, not as a saint, but as the weight behind every act of defiance. The galaxy has forgotten love. It has forgotten peace. It has forgotten its gods. But it has not forgotten duty. And that is his doing. He is the Emperor's most loyal son, the one who did not fall, because he was never allowed to rest. The builder who constructed his own tomb and called it humanity's salvation. The last wall between man and the abyss. And when the final siege comes, when the stars go out and the galaxy burns, when the last bastion falls silent and all hope collapses, they say the phalanx will stir. That somewhere in its heart, a voice will awaken. A voice carved from stone and sorrow. It will speak 3 words. I will hold. And for one last moment, the wall will stand. Because Rogal Dorn never forgave himself. And that is why humanity still lives.